Hello and welcome to Thinking It Through with Nate. I am your host, Nate. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode. Just as a reminder off the bat, I am on Supercast now, so you can get that link down in the description of the YouTube video. If you're listening on Supercast already, thank you so much. You can always get the video as well by just going to your Supercast platform and then going to the view episodes, and then you can get the video. There's a couple plans there. You can get the $5 a month plan, which gets you access to all of my content when I start doing bonus episodes and exclusive interviews. Or you can do the early subscriber package, which basically gets you all of my content forever. It's just $100 right now, so the best price it'll ever be. That'll go up in the future as I start to get better quality, do episodes more frequently, and have on better guests and things like that. But for now, if you get in on the ground floor, then you get all of my content forever for just $100. So go ahead and head over there. If you can't afford it though, there's always the free subscription. And if you can get the free subscription, I always appreciate that as well. It's super helpful for me just to know who's listening. And it's always great to see that people are listening. Kind of just builds my confidence as this is something that I want to continue doing and something that I've been interested in for a really long time. So I'm going for it and I appreciate your support. So let's go ahead and jump into today's topic. Today I'm going to be talking about COVID and comparing it to other leading causes of death. Yes, COVID was a leading cause of death in 2020 and in 2021. So I'm going to dive into those statistics a little bit and just kind of break them down, give some perspectives that I think are important around this data, and we'll go from there. So to start off, let's look at the statistics for COVID deaths in 2020. And for these stats, I'm just going to be looking specifically for the USA. The site that I'm reading this off of is called JAMA Network, J-A-M-A Network. It's just breaking down the leading causes of death in 2020. So they have this chart here, which I'll go ahead and edit into the video. And I'm just going to read these off. So the top leading cause of death in 2020 was heart disease, as it has been for a really long time in the US, with 690,882 deaths. Next up is cancer, which is also in theme for the past several years. I don't know how far back these trends go, but as far as I've been looking up these statistics, which has been years, this has been the order of things. Cancer, 598,932 deaths. And then in 2020, next on the list is COVID-19 with 345,323 deaths. Next on the list is unintentional injuries. Again, this is within theme as before COVID. With 192,176 deaths, and then the next is a stroke, which is 159,050 deaths. Just to read off some of the next ones down here, we have chronic lower respiratory diseases, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, influenza, pneumonia, kidney disease, and suicide. And so these are all of kind of like the leading causes of death in the United States of America. And so in 2020, COVID was number 3 on the list, so just take note of that. Now, looking at current statistics for what's happening in 2022, I've heard statistics and seen some things that say about 2,000 deaths a week. We're seeing about 2,500 deaths a week in the US. So if we do the quick math on this, 2,000 deaths a week for 52 weeks out of the year is 104,000 deaths out of the year. If it's 2,500 times 52 is 130,000 deaths in the year. That would put, if these numbers from 2020, which I'm going to be referring to mostly because 2021 just kind of ended, and so that data, as far as I know, hasn't been like really published yet, and everything is maybe not quite official. So we're just going to be referring to 2020. On this chart, it also has the data for the previous 5 years going back to 2015. So if this year, if we stay on this trajectory of 2,000 to 2,500 deaths a week, this would put COVID in the number 4, 5, 6, 7, it's like 9 or 10 or something like that, number 9 or 10 top leading cause of death. So in 2020 and potentially last year, I would think probably it's higher last year due to the Delta strain. So obviously, a rise of a new top 5 killer is a cause of concern. It just is. So I think like the reason that I think this is helpful to put it into context is because there's a lot of confusion over like, well, how serious is this compared to other diseases? How serious is this compared to other pandemics, stuff like that? Well, I think this kind of puts it in a light that, yeah, this was kind of a serious thing. I mean, all of a sudden we have a new leading cause of death, top five, in 2020, probably top five in 2021, still on track to be top 10 in this year. So that's why this is such a big discussion. It's not just like some random thing that's like normal. Like this is new and something to be concerned of. And so a lot of people will compare this to like the flu. So on this chart, the flu and pneumonia grouped together killed 53,495 people in 2020. So that's, obviously COVID is quite a bit more serious than that, or at least was in 2020 and 2021 with the original strain, and then with the Delta strain. Those were something to be concerned about. Now, some people may be thinking at this point, well, yeah, but there's overreported deaths and people are saying some deaths are COVID when they're not. I've heard that a lot. I'm not entirely convinced that that's happening as frequently as people make it out to be. I do think that relevant in this conversation is to understand how cause of death is usually listed on a death certificate. So there are oftentimes multiple causes of death on death certificates, and they'll list like a primary cause of death. And so with the like numbers of like how many people have died with like COVID-19, it could be true that maybe some people are over-reporting and putting that as a primary cause of death when it's not. Maybe even if I grant that, I still don't know if it's like big enough to really skew the statistics that much. But even if I grant that, there's also been places who like morticians aren't reporting COVID at all as a cause of death, even when it is, because they're like, well, other people are over-reporting. So there's all of these kind of factors that are pushing it in one direction or not. In pandemics, numbers are historically underreported for deaths until later on when it's like thoroughly investigated and reported accurately, just because so much is going on. You could also argue in the current time that might not be the case because we have better methods of tracking that down and keeping reports and stuff like that. All of that being said, I mean, who knows what the exact number is, but I think it's probably safe to say that if we go with the official numbers, it's somewhere close, and that can inform the discussion that we need to have without having an exact number and without exactly understanding the dynamics around reporting. I think it's still something that we should be taking seriously. So, that's why it's a cause of concern. But what's interesting to me is that it wasn't the leading cause of death, right? So this is one of the things that I want to point out, is that even in 2020, it wasn't the leading cause of death. It wasn't the leading cause of death last year in 2021. And this year especially, it's dramatically decreased from how many people it was killing 2 years ago. Like by, it's been cut in a third, from over 300,000 deaths to a little over 100,000 deaths. And so obviously I think like that's kind of reduced the things. It's actually kind of getting closer to the flu and pneumonia number. It's about double this year. And my guess is that that'll continue to drop. It's probably not going to go away forever. It may end up, stabilizing around the flu and pneumonia, which sucks. We're losing like maybe another 50,000 people a year, or maybe it's going to start taking away some of the people who would have died from the flu or pneumonia are just going to die from COVID instead. Like who knows what's going to happen over time, but either way, it's definitely less concerning than it used to be. But even when it was most concerning, it wasn't the leading cause of death. The leading cause of death was heart disease, and it has been for a long time. And you may think, if you're familiar with these numbers and how people usually die in the U.S., it's something that I've been personally interested in for a long time, just partially as a personal strategy to understand well, what ways are people dying right now in the country, and well, what can I do to try to avoid that? And funnily enough, most of the top causes of deaths are completely avoidable, or at least avoidable at the time that they happen. They could have been put off way later or something. You die of old age from getting heart disease or something like that. But usually it's people who are much younger than they should be getting heart disease or cancer or respiratory diseases or things like that. And that's because of the health crisis that we have in America. And so what's so interesting to me is that we're shouting from the rooftops COVID is a serious thing, and again, I do, especially in 2020, it was a serious thing. Now I think we're just gonna have to live with it. You should just go ahead and live your life normal pretty much at this point. Most of the people who are getting hospitalized and dying from COVID at this point are unvaccinated and they have like an average of 4 comorbidities, meaning they have an average of like 4 other pretty serious health problems that can contribute to them like dying from getting sick from anything. And so that's what's happening with COVID right now. But I want to point out that this is something that people are freaking out about. You know, it was this huge thing, like the biggest news story for 2 years. It was like the main narrative of the election in 2020 and all this kind of stuff. Yet heart disease has like consistently been like #1 killer of Americans over and over and over. It's still going to be probably like 7 times as much as COVID this year, right? Or maybe even more depending on if the deaths like drop off, right? But heart disease is not dropping off, and in fact the amount of people that heart disease has been killing is actually going up still every single year. And the fact that like we went into this pandemic lifestyle where everybody was locked down and quarantining also didn't help all of the conditions that contribute to people dying from heart disease, cancer, strokes, chronic lower respiratory diseases. All of these things usually come from an unhealthy lifestyle. And when I say an unhealthy lifestyle, I mean like not eating a balanced, healthy diet, smoking, like cigarettes specifically, not exercising, not getting enough sleep, and high stress levels, right? So like all of these things are like the leading causes of death, or contributing to the leading causes of death in America. Like all of the leading causes of death can be dramatically, like your chances of dying that way can be dramatically reduced if you don't like participate in any of those 5 groups, like eating poorly, smoking cigarettes, not exercising, not getting regular sleep, and having a lot of stress. Like those things are all contributors to the leading causes of death. And so my question is like, why aren't we talking about these things as much as we were talking about COVID? And like the obvious answer is, well, because it didn't happen all at once, and it wasn't this like weird precarious situation, and this is something that's been like growing out of the American lifestyle for a really long time. And like, sure, I'll grant all of that. I completely understand that. That makes sense, but it still doesn't justify why we aren't talking about these things. And like there has been a large campaign, I'll say, against like cigarettes, especially over like the past probably 20, 30 years. In my lifetime, I've always seen the campaign like don't smoke, it's bad for you. You know, I was raised like we were taught like smoking cigarettes is bad for you, all this kind of stuff, right? But like the biggest thing, the absolute biggest thing is eating unhealthy. Like the obesity numbers in America are getting appalling. I can't remember, I want to say it's something like 1/3 of all American children are now considered clinically obese, which is to say like that's not like anywhere in the range of normal. Like I think it's something like 2 standard deviations away from normal. Meaning like if you don't understand the statistics, what that basically means is that there's like a group, and then a standard deviation is like a statistical way of saying like this is how much of, you would say, is like 1 step outside the norm. Well, this is like 2 steps outside the norm, like 2 full body weight groups outside the norm of being a healthy weight. And that's 1/3 of all American children, like 1/3. That's tens of millions of people. Like that's a lot of people that are going to grow up already being unhealthy. And then that's not even mentioning the adult statistics, which are probably maybe not quite that high because, again, this trend is increasing, but still disturbingly high. Like what percentage of Americans are obese, especially when you start to compare that to other countries, like any other country in the world. It's pretty crazy. This is what I think, like, why aren't we talking about this kind of stuff? Like, I don't know necessarily what all of the solutions are. You know, my personal view of government is that you should be able to consume whatever you want to consume, but maybe we should be asking, like, why are people choosing to consume these things? Well, part of it is, like, advertising is really bad for us. Like, we're constantly advertised to want these, like, salty and sugary things. Our biology is wired to like those things more, but we're being advertised to like further like trigger like a psychological desire for these things. You know, there's also like we're just not taught like what true health is like. We obviously don't have like good role models. You know, maybe you could start talking about like government regulation on certain products that are like really, really bad for people. Like I think maybe in like the energy drink realm or something, that could be a valid conversation. But again, I do genuinely think that people should be allowed to eat what they want to eat, or like allowed to consume what they want to consume. But you know, probably things like depression and anxiety and the state of the world right now like are probably not helping people get into a healthy mindset and want to improve and want to be physically healthy, or like even care about eating healthy. all of those kind of things are just like falling by the wayside, and we're not talking about it. Like, this should be considered a crisis. Like, if we're gonna make deaths from a specific cause a marker of something that we should be concerned about, which I think is valid, I think there's other things too, like just overall satisfaction with life, you know, like infant death rates, the occurrence of like education, you know, how honest is the news, how happy are we, like what's our general life expectancy, like all those kind of things are pretty good measures of like how well a country and a population are doing as well. But you know, when you look at the top leading causes of death and they're all coming from like 5 key factors, like maybe we should be thinking about how can we reorganize the American lifestyle to not produce these causes of death, which means that like there'd still be probably the same amount of people dying per year eventually. Like, it would reduce, life expectancy would increase, and then the you know, amount of deaths would catch up, of course, because that's just how populations, you know, part die off and at the bottom replenishes, right? So, but all of those leading causes of death would start to become things like, you know, general, like, more old agey things, like things that like you just kind of like deteriorate and die, and like maybe again some of those things would still be from heart disease and stuff like that. Like, that's just what aging does, is it makes your faculties kind of get worse. But those kind of things would be happening much later in life, and I'm sure that this list would reorganize itself. Like, this wouldn't be the same list that it is. I don't even know, you know, what other causes of death there would be, but the fact that, like, you know, cancer, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, Alzheimer's, chronic lower respiratory diseases, like all of these are some of like the top leading causes of death, is to me pretty obvious that that's coming from poor health. So that's why I think like the problem is truly with an American lifestyle, and that's something that needs to be a bigger conversation. Again, I hate to put like issues on personal responsibility unless they really are, and I think this is one of those things that more so falls on the side of personal responsibility. I do think there should be like maybe better laws around you know, marketing and stuff like that, and especially like marketing towards children with like super terrible things that create these habits that last a lifetime. Those are kind of the things that maybe we can do from a governmental perspective, but there are also things that we need to understand, that like, what are we doing to our individuals to make them continually make these bad choices? I don't think we should force them to make good choices. If somebody wants to eat, you know, crappy and die young, that's their choice, and I don't think anybody has a right to tell them to do otherwise. But I think we should encourage people to do otherwise, and I think when people are generally in a healthy, happy mindset, they want to do otherwise. And so those are all the kind of key things that I think point to this. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. Just kind of interesting conversation. Again, I do think, you know, COVID was something to be concerned about. I think it's getting to the point where it's not as much anymore. But what about all these other causes of death? Why are we ignoring what generally increases the chance of getting these problems and dying from them? Like, obviously cancer is something that maybe you can't completely avoid. Like, some people are healthy and get cancer, but generally cancers are happening in people who smoke cigarettes, who eat unhealthy, who don't exercise, who have high levels of stress and don't sleep enough. Like, all of those things increase your risk of getting even cancer. So I think even cancer deaths would be dramatically decreased if we had a healthier lifestyle. Maybe cancer would become the number one because it's something that we haven't really solved when it does occur outside of those things. But I don't think heart disease, it makes a ton of sense for heart disease to be the number one leading cause of death. I think that's actually like preventable. But anyway, so yeah, conversation that I think is kind of important that we should be having. I think that we need to be focusing on health in general more, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that. So go ahead and comment down below if you're listening on YouTube what your thoughts are on this. I'd love to hear people's thoughts. I'm going to read the comments. And then, of course, just a quick reminder again that you can go down to Supercast in the link down in the description if you're watching on YouTube to get the audio-only version. There's paid subscriptions, but you can also do the free subscription to get all of these normal videos on there. Whatever you do, that's super helpful for me, so thank you. If you are watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that like, subscribe, and bell, as I hear that helps the algorithm quite a bit. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, guys. There will be another video up here that you can watch, and have a great one.